Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome back to the Great Movie Ride podcast. I am your host, Gaston, with my co-host, Jerryofdom, and we are once again diving into the movies. We've saved you a seat as we talk about the brand new MCU film, Spider-Man No Way Home.
Now the Spider-Mans do some diving. Spider-Man, he do be diving. You know, he jumps off a bridge, he do be diving. He dives after people. Spider-Man was diving.
So with that being said, I suppose, if you haven't checked out our previous podcast, go ahead and take a look. We've done Eternals, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and Spider-Man 2. And yes, and stay tuned for the end of this episode to find out what we are doing next time. So let's kick this off with the previewing thoughts. And why don't you go ahead and open us off, Nick?
I was hyped for this movie. This is like my most anticipated movie since like Endgame. And, you know, the last Marvel movie I saw in theaters was Spider-Man. That's the weird part.
Eternals.
Well, okay. You know, I sometimes forget I've seen that movie in theaters. I remember watching it, but I don't remember. Because I always go to Silver City for my movies, Peter. But if we ignore Eternals, the last one was Spider-Man. So, it's like going from Spider-Man to Spider-Man, you know? Eternals was a completely different MCU movie entirely, Peter. It counts as an MCU. Let's jump off this. I was excited for this movie. It was great. I saw those trailers. Amazing. Just excitement.
I was excited. I've enjoyed the MCU Spider-Man films very, very much. And so I was excited just on that principle. And then the trailer was released and showed off Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. And then I got more pumped than I'd been since Endgame. And then, as I mentioned in last podcast, go ahead and check that out, Spider-Man 2. I love Alfred Molina's portrayal of the character, and it is literally one of the best comic book performances of all time, in my opinion. And then there were the rumors of the various characters that we're going to talk about and the other villains being confirmed. And there was a point where, I forget exactly, I think we were hanging out at my place, and we both kind of looked at each other and just came to this realization that, what if it's overstuffed like Spider-Man 3 and doesn't stick the landing?
We all worried for a little bit.
Yeah.
I started to just throw it away because I'm like, okay, this is like the first time I've seen an entire Spider-Man trilogy in theaters. I didn't grow up with Amazing Spider-Man. I grew up watching the Tobey Maguire movies on my DVD player. And then Spider-Man, new Spider-Man that I get to enjoy. So knowing that they were going for more villains in it like they had in the past two trilogies. Well, not trilogies, but you know what I
mean. Yeah, series.
Series. I was like, okay. I don't really care for the Amazing Spider-Man movies, though performance was good. It's the writing that's bad.
Mood.
And then Spider-Man 3 with Tobey. It's the one that I try to defend, but there's no way I can actually defend it. It's just childhood me watched it so often that I just like it so much. And I don't think if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't care so much. But yes, there was worries.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think it's true for both of us that despite our concerns, we were still super excited for this film.
I think if it wasn't for showing Doc Ock, it would be like...
The hype would have been so different. Because I think if it weren't for Doc Ock, I think the hype would have been on Strange being involved, honestly.
Well, it was originally, because I was reading a few articles, that it was going to look like they weren't going to show the villains at all.
I heard that.
Like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange Civil War type of deal.
Yeah, I heard that
and
too.
Instantly Doctor Strange would kick his butt, but you know.
Or would he? I mean, like, we saw the movie.
We saw.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about that in the heavy spoilers section. So with all that being said, let's enter the light spoiler territory with the brief plot sum up. Peter Parker has to deal with the fallout of Mysterio revealing his identity as Spider-Man to the entire world. When the world makes life hard for those Peter is closest to, he goes to Doctor Strange and asks for him to make the world forget that he is Spider-Man. When Parker unintentionally meddles with the spell, well, he intended to meddle with it, just not mess it up.
Yeah.
And people from across the multiverse who knows that he is Peter Parker, that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, is pulled into the MCU. Parker must use his friends and family to try and send them back home. Except there is no way home. Dun dun dun! Roll
I like
credits.
the memes where it's like the next movie will be called Spider-Man Homeless Home.
Homeless, yeah, yeah. So let's talk characters, which is always the beefiest section in our podcast, and actually the one I enjoy talking about the most. I love analyzing the characters.
I think today, though, for this one, it will be the spoilers that end up being the most beefy.
Probably, because there's a lot.
There's a lot to
There's a
take
lot
in,
to
and
unpack.
it's hard to not spoil it.
Yeah, we're gonna do our very best, and just like with Eternal, spoiler characters will not be talked about in this section. We're looking at you, Eros and Pip the Troll, and whatever spoiler characters there were in Eternals. But
So anyone we've seen in trailers is who we'll talk about.
exactly, I think I have one character who wasn't in the trailer who we're going to talk about as well, but it's not a spoiler that he's involved. I just wanted to mention. So, as I said last time, I'm going to mirror the exact same thing. We can't talk about a Spider-Man movie without talking about Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
So, of course, Spider-Man in the MCU is portrayed by Tom Holland, a teenager and Avenger who receives spider-like abilities after being bitten by a radioactive spider. That happened off screen. The film explores the fallout of Far From Home's mid-credit scenes, in which Parker's identity as Spider-Man is exposed, and Parker is far more pessimistic in contrast to his previous MCU films. Tom Holland was quoted as saying that Parker feels defeated and insecure, and he was very excited to explore that darker subject matter with the character. So,
My chair is squeaking today for some reason. All right.
so why don't you start?
Spider-Man.
Yeah, why don't you start with Holland?
He's red and blue. But in this movie, he's red and black, and then some gold shows up, so different colors, you know? That's not important. We care about Spider-Man and Peter Parker. So he's not much different from the other two movies, you know? Still the same guy, dealing with things.
Yeah, I disagree with that statement pretty much wholeheartedly.
I don't know where I'm going with this, Peter.
I don't think he's the same at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Clearly, we're very prepared for this today.
Clearly. I've been trying to not eat a bag of Doritos while doing this because it would ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, please don't do that. Tom Holland is my favorite Spider-Man. He is. I believe that Tobey was a better Peter Parker, and that's not a hot take. A lot of people think that. But then I hear a lot of people say that Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man, and I disagree with that personally. But a lot of people do believe that. And even though Tobey's a better Parker, Holland is still a really good Parker, and he is my favorite Spider-Man. He's charming and relatable, and he's able to do it well in both Parker and Spider-Man. Feel charming and relatable, whereas Tobey Maguire doesn't feel really charming as Spider-Man. As Parker, yes, but as Spider-Man, not as much.
Parker, like Tobey, is relatable to me, you know? Pretty much how it goes for me. Just sit alone, eat your food, do your stuff. Except I'm not as smart as, you know? But I have seen The Amazing Spider-Man a few times. I've only watched the second one like once because I was like, that ending's upsetting and I don't like seeing that. But he's a very good Spider-Man. As we've talked about, Spider-Man is someone that's quirky and throws jokes and fights and all that. You know, he does that well. Andrew Garfield does that well.
Yeah,
And I think
remember
that's why
that.
that's a good Spider-Man. And Tobey doesn't do that.
No. But I just prefer Holland's quips, I guess, and like especially I keep going back to the introduction of the character of Civil War. That is like the best Spider-Man intro ever.
All right.
You have a metal arm? That is so awesome. And then by the movie diving into deeper material, Tom Holland's acting, especially in the third act, is incredible.
Oh yeah,
Like, he is one of the best up and coming actors. Well, I guess
he's
he's
in
not really
a
up and
lot of
coming.
things.
Yeah, I guess he's not up and coming anymore. He's here now, but he's one of the best. um,
Like, there's a few younger actors that are definitely taking the podium of like the next big actors. You know?
yeah, and he's definitely earned his spot on that podium.
Oh yeah,
Uh, Anything else you want to say about Parker?
he was other than like he's done really well. He has a lot more emotion
Mm-hmm.
than it used to because he was very much. I don't think in Far From Home, not until the near end where it really sits in with him that Tony is gone, and you see that emotion and acting come from Tom, and you see that a lot in this one. There's a lot of things happening to him, and he shows it well.
Yeah. It's if you watch the three Spider-Man films, even Civil War, including scenes of that, you really see him grow up, and not necessarily by choice either.
No,
It's a very natural progression, though, at the same time, despite it not being by choice. That a lot of people, young adults and teenagers, can really relate to that character path. Um, so let's talk about MJ, who is portrayed, of course, by Zendaya. Parker's classmate and girlfriend. The character's full name is revealed in the film to be Michelle Jones Watson, which, of course, MJ Watson, very close to the comic counterpart, little tongue in cheek, perhaps. And I'm going to go first with her. And she is my favorite of the live action Spider Man love interests. Um, Looking at Spider Gwen for my favorite of all those Spider Man films from Into the Spider Verse, but of the live action, she is my favorite. Strong, independent woman who don't need no man and isn't demeaned by the relationship she has with Parker. And
no,
like, while she does need to be saved from time to time, she never feels like a damsel in distress like
no.
MJ did in Tobey Maguire's films.
Yeah,
She could really feel like damsel in distress, especially in the first and the third one, especially, and a bit in the second one too. But and playing opposite of the darker story with Parker, she really gets to be a large part of the emotion, and that closing scene that we can't talk too much about just yet because spoilers
that hurt.
was
That
truly
hurt.
top-notch acting on all parties involved. It was wow.
But it's done well. The she I still prefer the original Mary Jane Watson just because
Hey, you're
you
allowed,
see
man.
it so often you're used to it. But she does well. It's a very different take to what Mary Jane
Oh
is
yeah.
like usually because she's very much like a yeah, I could do whatever. I just don't have powers,
Mm-hmm.
That's what she gives. And she does it well. She gives a good, interesting story, and they tie in things good in this movie.
Yeah. I like the dynamic that she has with Parker and Ned because it's like Ned and Parker are brilliant but dumb as heck in like social situations. And MJ's smart too, but she's very socially aware and she's like that little beacon of guys. Like I go back to Homecoming when they're looking at Liz and then you guys are dorks. It's already creepy and like she's aware and they're not. They're just
Yeah,
they're brilliant but
ugh.
stupid.
It's like me in real life. You know?
Anything else you wish to say about MJ?
Uh, no, I don't have much to add. But she is shown well, and in the first bit of the movie, where I guess this isn't technically spoilers because everyone knows that he starts running away from the people and all that because it's revealed. Everyone's like, "You killed him," and she's like, "What the heck do I do? Get off!" Because everyone's like climbing onto her,
Mm.
and he takes her, and then you know Peter takes her on top of that bridge, and she's like, "Oh, why are we up here?" And she's like, "Oh shoot." And she just hates this way, but it's entertaining watching her react to everything
Yeah,
because you don't see in the other movies them swinging with Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy. It's
not
not
like that, no.
no.
um, And I have an interesting take on that opening scene, but we'll talk about that a bit later. That I think you'll really appreciate my take on it. So let's talk about Ned Leeds, portrayed by Jacob Batalon. If I said the last name wrong, I apologize. Parker's best friend and the guy in the chair. And he lost a lot of weight in between films, actually. Like, if you compare his Infinity War Endgame cameos Far From Home to this, he's lost a lot of weight.
Oh yeah.
And why don't you go ahead and start with Ned?
He he might be my favorite like friend of Peter's. You know,
Mm,
there wasn't really a friend of Peter's in the Amazing Spider-Mans, and then in the Toby ones, it was Harry.
yeah,
But Harry was very much all over the place with
all over the
Peter.
place.
And you're like, oh my goodness. But this one feels like a friendship. They feel
Yeah,
like they're good friends and they
absolutely.
are close. And seeing that handshake, all that makes me want to have one of those crazy handshakes. And everyone's like, what the heck is happening, you know?
Yeah,
But they did a lot of interesting stuff with him. And maybe he might show up in a certain movie in the future.
a certain movie. You can't see our
Yeah.
hand gestures, so it's fine.
No.
Um, yeah, Ned is a fan favorite character for a reason.
Oh, yeah.
He is funny. He is a heartwarming friendship with Parker. But this film, what it does very well for all its characters, is it allows the actors to lean into the character and get new depth. And I really feel that with Ned, probably more than anyone else. He's not as funny as he was in previous films, but that's because the movie's not as funny.
No.
And like he still is very funny and delivers some great laughs, but the plot needs more emotion, and Batalone was more than up to the task to bring that emotion to Ned. And it is truly great to see his arc and hope he sticks around for a while. I'm very excited.
Like when they chill out on top of the high school and he's like, okay,
Yeah.
and they're like, what the heck?
Well, I just the scene at the end in the science lab, or towards the end, where he's talking about
Yeah.
certain things we'll talk about later. I love it. So let's talk about Dr. Stephen Strange, portrayed by Benedict Cumberbatch, a neurosurgeon who became a master of the mystic arts following a career-ending accident. Tom Holland was quoted saying that Strange is not a mentor to Parker, like Tony Stark was in Homecoming, but he sees them more of colleagues, and notes that their relationship breaks down throughout the course of the film. Cumberbatch was also quoted saying that there is a close relationship between Strange and Parker because they're both neighborhood superheroes who has that shared history of Infinity War and Endgame. As we
Yeah.
saw in the trailer, he's like, we saved the universe, half the universe, so you can call me, you don't have to call me sir, and then Steven. Sounds weird, but I'll allow it. So I'll start with Doctor Strange. Cumberbatch is always charming in literally whatever role he does.
Oh, yeah.
And he has this enjoyable screen presence that is also true for every role he does. Like, even Smog has a cool character who has this massive, massive screen presence. And Doctor Strange is much the same way. Um, and the thing that they had to do, because everyone saw in the trailer, is Strange and Parker fighting. So the thing you have to do when you do hero versus hero is you have to make it not feel forced. It has to fit the story. And I feel like the conflict between him and Parker really worked.
Because it wasn't like
it was understandable.
Oh yeah, like it was like a very much like, hey, you gotta stop this. You don't understand what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Not like a, why are you doing this? I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah, exactly. I have one more thought on him that I'll share after you give your thoughts on Mr. Strange.
I was excited for him. We were both a little unsure what they were gonna do with him because of the way the trailers presented him. We were like, okay, this might be
That's what I'm
bad,
gonna
but we
comment
weren't.
on.
Yeah. But it was surprising of the way he played, and he very much has showed that, you know, if certain things went the way that they could have gone, the movie would not have been as long as it did.
For sure. That's so what we're referring to is there was a ton of theories when the trailers came out that he was Mephisto. And the primary one being that he was being nice to Parker. And after I saw the movie, I really stopped and thought about it. I'm like, what part of that is out of character for him?
Yeah.
Because if you pay attention to the movie, like Doctor Strange, he is a nice guy. He's
Oh yeah.
arrogant, unselfish, yeah, but he's not punching a puppy. He's a
No.
pretty nice guy, and they do have that shared history. The smile and acknowledgement, like, I feel like that was warranted.
It just didn't go through our brains like, oh, this makes sense. It was, this feels weird.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's talk about Harold Happy Hogan, who once again returns to the Spider-Man movies, portrayed by Jon Favreau, the head of security for Stark Industries and former bodyguard and driver of Tony Stark, who continues to look after Parker. I can almost guarantee it's never going to be confirmed, but I feel like somewhere in Stark's will that he no doubt wrote when he had a feeling he was going to die when he recorded that message for Morgan, I have no doubt that he included in that will, Happy, look after Parker. I have no doubt that that was included somewhere.
And then Happy dates his aunt.
Yeah. So it's your turn to go first for Happy.
So I enjoyed him in this movie, but it gives off the vibe that I don't think Happy will be coming back in another Marvel movie. This felt like his last one. A lot of
Unfortunately, I
things
think
have
you're right.
changed in the Marvel universe, and I think after Tony Stark gone from it, a lot of things are changing,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have the same presence as he might have a few years ago.
No, for sure.
But I very much enjoyed his role in this. He gave an emotional ending to it.
Yes, and more on that
and
later.
and seeing different things happen and seeing what happened to him, it was hard to see some of the things what happened because you felt bad for him
Yeah.
because he didn't have a lot in his life. He was the security manager, and
Yeah.
you never really saw anything else. So it seemed like his honor was just being able to be friends with Tony.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that as well.
And so seeing how he was portrayed in this movie, I enjoyed it, and he felt more in depth than he usually does.
Yes, I think that's true for everybody. If you haven't figured that out already, yeah, I love Happy Hogan. Who doesn't? He is
Yeah.
so great.
He's a happy guy.
The dynamic between him and Parker, and how it changes throughout the course of the three Spider-Man films, is so good. My only complaint is he's not in it enough. And if that truly is the last time we see him, I will miss him sorely. I'm just kind of hoping that he sticks around because we all know that he's Parker's real guy in the chair. Like Ned wasn't Homecoming, but Far From Home, that ending, we all know Happy's the real guy in the chair. And I hope we see more of him, but I could see them not bringing him back. But hopefully they do. So now let's talk about May Parker, portrayed by Marissa Tomei, Parker's aunt. Um, so I touched on this briefly in the last podcast. Go ahead and take a look at that, where we talked about that version of Aunt May. And that she's the best Aunt May, but I always felt that his aunt wouldn't be old enough to be his grandma. And that's what Marissa Tomei is. She's the right age. And she's very likable. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's not that she's a bad Aunt May at all. And her dynamic with Holland really shines in this film, more so than the others. And though this is a mild spoiler, this is the light spoiler section, it doesn't really hit you until this movie that she has the impact on Holland's Parker that Uncle Ben had on Maguire and Garfield, because we never saw Uncle Ben in this universe. So that's what that dynamic really is, and it is very nice and very well done.
I yeah, I enjoyed May Parker. She very much gave off the vibe of all the other ones were like either his aunt or his grandmother. That's what it gave the vibe of. The original, the age range was huge.
Yeah.
It was noticeable. But she still feels like that old loving lady that she would call you hon if you helped her with your groceries. Um, but she gives off the vibe like she's that cool aunt that you enjoy hanging out with. And in this movie, she feels like a mom to Peter.
Yeah, they really double down on that.
It felt like this is what Peter needs in his life, and it felt good. I enjoyed that.
All right. So now let's get to what people are more interested in.
The
Let's talk.
villains.
Yeah, let's talk about the villains. So we're gonna start with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe, a scientist and the CEO of Oscorp from an alternate reality who tested an unstable strength enhancer on himself and developed an insane alternate personality while using advanced Oscorp armor and equipment. Dafoe reprises his role from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Dafoe was quoted saying that Green Goblin is further down the line with a few more tricks up his sleeve compared to the original Spider-Man. So this would be your turn.
I like Green Goblin. He gives a menacing vibe in this movie. He feels like a menace to society.
Yep.
There is that apartment scene with him. A bit of a spoiler, but that just was like, oh my goodness sakes, this guy is like. I actually felt fear when Peter's fighting him. That was like crazy. They did a good, impactful thing with Green Goblin in this movie.
Yeah.
And he shows up a bit later. Like, he's the last villain to show
Yeah,
up.
kind of. He has a cameo earlier, but doesn't really arrive till later.
Yeah.
So I feel it's safe to say that despite there being 5 villains, he is the primary antagonist, the focus. And boy, Willem Dafoe absolutely crushes this role. So that role was from '02 Spider-Man, so it's almost 20 years, and he looks exactly the same.
He looks so different.
It's amazing. And I heard a thing that he refused to come back to the role unless he could do his own action scenes and stunts.
Yeah, he did his own stunt.
That's a mid-60s-year-old man doing some pretty impressive stunts.
Well, I remember reading a thing, like, him and Tom, like, after doing things, they were left, like, there was blood from doing their own stunts.
It's just a crazy thing, and yeah, tremendous performance and really, really interesting, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the heavy spoilers. So now, Dr. Otto Octavius, Alfred Molina, Doc Ock, a scientist from an alternate reality with 4 artificially intelligent mechanical tentacles fused to his body after an accident. Molina reprises his role from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, with this film continuing from the character's story prior to his death in that film. Molina was surprised by this approach because he had aged in the years intervening and no longer had the same physicality, but digital de-aging was used to make him look physically the same, and the tentacles were CGI instead of puppetry and CGI as they were.
I heard there
originally.
was some puppetry.
What I read was full CGI, but who knows?
I heard there was a mix of the two.
And I get to go first, shocking nobody. After, if you heard last week's, Alfred Molina just further cements himself and Doc Ock as iconic comic book movie performance and antagonist. And the way he is used in the film, we can't really talk about without heavy spoilers, but man, is he ever used really well. And he's in a lot more than I think people were afraid he would be in. Because there was a lot of people I talked to who were afraid he wouldn't be in it much. He's in it a fair bit. And the performance is absolute perfection. And once again, my favorite character in this film, just like last week or 2 weeks ago, Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. Absolutely love it. Your go.
Yeah, I was surprised because if we were to rate like which one's got the most screen time and most development, I would say he was number 3. I'd say number 1 is Green Goblin, and then number 2 is Electro, and then number 3 is Doc Ock.
Yeah.
But he was done really well, and he has a few conversations with different characters, and they feel like good conversations, and there's just different interactions, and they feel right. They feel like this is how it should be, knowing who he is.
Even the comedy aspect that is used with him is so good. Because, like, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films are nowhere near as funny as the MCU films. The MCU has their own different type of humor. But all the characters really fit into the humor really well, but Doc Ock has especially a couple that made me laugh out loud. That was just really well done.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Electro, Max Dillon, Jamie Foxx. An Oscorp electrical engineer from an alternate reality who gained electric powers after an accident involving genetically modified electric eels. This is, of course, reprising the role from Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The character was redesigned for No Way Home, foregoing the blue design in that film in favor of a more yellow one accurate to the comics. You open with Electro.
I like how they tied in, actually kind of explained why it was yellow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they were like, this is a different universe, so different energy from his.
Yeah.
And that's why he was that color. So it didn't feel out of place, other than his hair. His hair felt out of place. And his teeth, those two should not. But it was done well. He was shown good. Um, he was an enjoyable character in this.
Yeah.
He feels the most human out of the villains.
Mm. I felt bad for Jamie Foxx in The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Oh yeah.
Because the movie wasn't great. And it looked like he wanted to be there and he wanted the movie to be good, but his acting performance couldn't save the film. The material he was given just was not good. But the MCU lets him do exactly that. He gets to be there, have fun, and give a good performance in a good movie. His motivations are improved upon from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and thanks to his face actually being visible, he can actually act and portray much more emotion. That he's far more interesting than he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So let's talk about Sandman, who is, of course, Flint Marko, portrayed by Thomas Hayden Church, a small-time crook from an alternate reality who receives sand-like abilities following an accident from Spider-Man 3. So I guess I'm going first. So when I saw that Sandman was one of the villains in the trailers, I was confused. Because at the end of 3, he leaves peacefully. He's just like, alright, we're all good here. And he leaves. That being said, they handled it pretty well as to why he would be a villain. I mean, like, when he first returned, mild spoiler, he's defending Parker from Electro. Which felt really good, and he had a unique take on everything from the others because he didn't die. So, like, while all the other villains had met their fates, he didn't. So he had a very different take on what was happening with everybody.
I'm still confused on what really pulled all the characters there, because they say it's people who knew the identity of Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
Yeah, but one of these do not know that.
No.
Which is, of course, mild spoilers for Amazing Spider-Man 2, but Electro he shouldn't know that.
No.
Which is a plot hole, to be sure. And whenever you do a film like this, there's going to be plot holes.
Oh, yeah.
My complaint with Sandman will be talked about more in heavy spoilers, but it has to do with his role in the climax, but more on that later.
Yeah.
Take it away.
He didn't. He was very much lower down on the importance of the villains. In this movie
the final two villains we're talking about are very much secondary characters.
Oh yeah, they didn't. If they had just done Doc Ock. Well, no, Sandman did have his role. He talks to Electro a bit.
Oh yeah, they all have a role, but
and I think
and the next one are lower end of the importance.
But he did have his importance, and he felt like he should be there.
Yes, like he fit the plot. What we're saying is that he wasn't used as much as the other three, is what we're saying. Yeah. We're not saying that it was bad that he was included. It was really cool to see so many people in the same place. We'll do a mild backtrack there because I misspoke.
Understood.
So let's talk about the Lizard, Dr. Kurt Connors, portrayed by Rhys Ifans, an Oscorp scientist from an alternate reality who attempted to engineer a regeneration serum to help regrow limbs and human tissue, but was transformed into a large reptilian monster from The Amazing Spider-Man. Here you go.
Yeah, this character didn't need to be in the movie if they didn't include him. He didn't do much. He was kind of just there.
Yeah.
Even in one part, he is sitting in a truck for most of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, okay, so what's he doing? And it's never really explained.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I feel like the only reason to include him is if there was one more villain to make the Sinister Six, but there is only the 5 villains, so
Yeah.
it's a little disappointing. But yeah, I agree. He was a pretty boring villain to begin with in Amazing Spider-Man, and the MCU doesn't really give him anything more to do. He's a
No.
fine antagonist as a punching bag, kind of like a henchman for somebody. And the fact that he doesn't have to carry this movie really is to the movie's benefit. Um, but he's pretty one note.
Yeah.
And he is pretty much just a punching bag in the climax as he gets his butt whooped pretty quickly.
Oh yeah.
So we got 2 more characters to talk about here, and as per the norm, actually we've hit the final 2 characters much faster. So let's talk about Flash Thompson, who is portrayed by Tony Revolori, Parker's classmate and former rival. And I'm going to go on a mild rant here. Of all the characters from the previous films from the school to return for more than a cameo, they chose Flash. I get why. He is Parker's rival and he has that love of Spider-Man. And Revolori's performance is perfect for a narcissistic bully.
Yeah.
But if you're going to bring back one school character for more than just a brief cameo, it should have been Mr. Harrington, because he is an underappreciated gem. He is so funny in Homecoming and especially in Far From Home, trying to lead the kids on the various locations and put a positive spin on things. Mr. Harrington is a gem, and it should have been him.
Oh yeah.
Flash is my least favorite character in the film that we're talking about, the main characters. And that's nothing against the actor. The actor is perfect for the role. It's you're not supposed to like Flash, and you don't. That's all there is to it.
I actually liked Flash.
Okay, well, go ahead and give your take on it.
Like, I never had any characters that were like my least favorite, other than the one guy that works in the shop of MJ's. That guy was annoying, but he's in it for 5 minutes. Her boss.
Oh, yeah. He's
Yeah,
really
other
in
than
it.
that,
I wasn't even going to mention. I forgot he existed.
exactly. But I didn't actually mind Flash. He wasn't a bad character. He was there, and he's played a lot differently than he was in like
That's
the
true.
other ones. He feels more of a person and less of just I'm gonna beat the crap out of Peter Parker.
Yeah, like Amazing Spider-Man's version, especially.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah, and like you still laugh at the scenes he's in because he's used for some pretty good punchlines throughout the MCU.
yeah.
But I do see what you're saying. I do.
He could have been just a very one note character, but he had more of a personality. We felt.
Yeah. I would have preferred Mr. Harrington. Just on a side note,
Yeah.
if you could bring back one of the school characters for more than just a cameo, who would you have used? I feel like a lot of people are going to say Betty Brant.
Girlfriend.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are going to say Betty Brant.
I just want to see Ned and hers interaction because I saw one video because the Daily Bugle there was like an official TikTok for it.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And she does interviews, and there's one with her and Ned, and it's like, so is it bad to have a conversation with your ex or something like that? And then they keep calling each other beautiful through the whole thing, and it just is hilarious.
Speaking of the Daily Bugle, let's transition to Jonah Jameson, portrayed by J.K. Simmons, the host of the DailyBugle.net, not a newspaper this time, in an attempt to modernize that profession. And it works just fine. Like, I'm sure there are some comic book purists who will be upset that he's not a newspaper editor anymore, but it suits. It's just fine. And I like watching as he becomes more successful chasing the Spider-Man cloud, how his studio improves. I liked that a lot. But I think it is your turn to talk about Mr. Jameson.
He was good. He was the same. It's good that they had the same J.K. Simmons.
Yeah.
That's who they need.
No one else can do that role.
No one else can. He was well done. I enjoyed it. He gives that annoying vibe as he should. You know, he was much more like, "Come on, why are you doing this? I want to hit you" type of guy than he was in like the Tobey Maguire ones. Because those ones he felt like he was likable, but at the same time he also felt like comedy relief. at
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. I feel like he is a spoof on Alex Jones, right down to the character design with the shaved head and the dark blue jacket. He's gonna turn the freaking frogs gay. Do you understand that? He wants his pictures of Spider-Man now. He's not as fun as he is in the Maguire films, but he still feels like Jameson.
Yeah.
And there's not too much else to say, as I feel a lot of people will be disappointed by how little he's in the film, because he's not in it much, but neither was he in the Maguire films, really. He's not supposed to be in your face. He's a nice little side character that makes you all have that knowing smile of, oh, yes, Jameson.
Yeah.
Okay, so, how are we doing time-wise?
Spoilers.
Well, not yet. We're under an hour as we head to effects and cinematography, so we're doing well. Better timing this time, I think. So effects and cinematography. I thought the effects were really great.
Oh yeah.
Of the MCU films that we've reviewed so far, Shang-Chi and The Eternals, this one had the strongest visuals, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Nothing really jumped out at me at being a bad special effect. There's probably going to be more when I see it again, because I was very much caught up in the spectacle, as I think most people were. And we're doing this on one viewing instead of our usual
2 viewings.
Yeah, with the exception of Eternals, which we wrote the Eternals script like the day after, so it was fresher.
Yeah, we recorded it the day after.
Yeah, exactly. So it was fresher than this. But the only effect I can think of off the top of my head was there's one shot of Doc Ock when he's holding Parker under the bridge, and it's looking up at him, that the de-aging didn't work, and it just looks odd. But it's pretty much just a nitpick, and otherwise I have no complaints as of right now.
There are scenes. They're a bit of a spoiler though, so I'm
don't
not
talk
gonna
about that yet.
But most of it was good. But there's one scene in particular that bothers me just a little bit.
Okay, so we'll talk about that when we can talk about that. And then the cinematography was solid. It was solid. The mirror dimension sequence was cool, but the mirror dimension always is. And there's a couple of really good shots at the climax that will likely become iconic, but we can't talk about them just yet. Just stay tuned. But my one complaint, as far as the cinematography goes, is a few of the scenes in the Sanctum's basement are way too dark to actually get a sense of what's happening.
You don't know what's around or what might be happening, and it's just kind of like, this is dark.
And I feel like it was done to save on having to design the set further. But at the end of the day, it's still a pretty minor nitpick. Because it's just, you can see what you need to see, but it doesn't benefit the set having all that part blacked out.
Yeah.
You got anything to add for cinematography?
There wasn't a lot that I can think of to add. It was really good. It looked really good. And I think that's what it did good at.
So let's talk about the writing and score. The writing was solid.
Yeah.
I don't have any major complaints, but nothing really jumps out at me as being spectacular. There are a few lines that are, of course, going to be pretty popular, but nothing blew me away. It was
I'm something of a scientist myself.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the memes. But it was really just, I don't think any of the Spider-Man scripts can claim to having a great script. It's really the performances that make it so good. And that's the same for this. It's a solid script. There's a few plot holes, as we mentioned, but it's just, it works. It's fine. May saying the great power line was a nice touch too, a nice callback. Gives you a nice dose of nostalgia, because we all know this film had no nostalgia in it. And some of the memes made it in. Anything to add about the writing?
There's some memes that I wish they had included, though they didn't.
Actually, I can't even say what that meme is without spoiling something, so I can't specify that one yet.
There was some good lines. I'll give it that. It did good at one-liners in this movie.
Yes, that is true. And for the first time, really, or I guess I said nice things about the score last time too, but the score rocked in this film. There was good callbacks with the score, with like the classic Spider-Man theme as well as new score being in it. And of course, by classic Spider-Man theme, I literally mean the ones from Homecoming. Calm down, all you fanboys out there. We're not talking about anything yet. And then the Doctor Strange theme as well gave a nice boost of nostalgia. And then hearing the Henry Elfman like Doc Ock and Green Goblin score again was a nice touch. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, where else could you find Doc Ock's theme, Doctor Strange theme, and the current Spider-Man theme in the same movie? Nowhere.
No, you're not gonna
It's
find
so
that
good.
anywhere.
Anything to add about that?
I think there's only like 2 scores, or just one that I wish they included, but they didn't have.
Mm.
But yeah, again, I'm not like a big paying attention to what music is going on, but this one felt like this was impactful. Like I can feel the soundtrack in this.
Mm.
There's only one other movie this year that's done that.
Next week's topic, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the score in that movie is incredible. But more on that next
It's
week. Make sure you tune in next time. It's not next week, but make sure you tune in next time for that. Warning! Warning! It is heavy spoilers time. If you do not want to be spoiled, turn away now. And if you're still here, we appreciate you. Let's
or
dive
maybe they
right
just
into
want
it.
spoilers
Yeah, maybe. So let's dive into this.
for themselves.
So, like we've adapted to doing recently, we're going to go chunk by chunk and analyze each chunk and go for it. So,
The last chunk, Peter. There's so much.
actually, I've split that into a couple chunks. You'll see. So, after Quentin Beck posthumously frames Parker for his murder and reveals the identity to the world, Aunt May, MJ, and Ned, and Parker himself, of course, are all interrogated by the Department of Damage Control previously established in Homecoming. Parker's lawyer, who is Matt Murdock, portrayed by Charlie Cox, for all you Netflix fans, that is indeed Daredevil, and he is indeed playing Daredevil, get the charges dropped, but the group continues to grapple with negative publicity. After Parker, MJ, and Ned's MIT applications are rejected, Parker visits the Sanctum Sanctorum to ask for help that's the wrong preposition, from Doctor Strange, who suggests a spell that would make people forget that Parker is Spider-Man. While he is casting said spell, Parker requests alterations to allow MJ, Ned, and May to retain their memories, and the interruptions corrupt the spell. Strange manages to contain it and forces Parker to leave. Chunk 1. What do you got?
I had seen the pictures before of Daredevil being in
Charlie Cox, yeah.
I had seen that, and I was like, okay, I don't know if they're real, I don't know if they're fake, but I like how they did it, because he is blind. Everyone already knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's sitting there talking to Peter, and someone throws a rock, and he catches it, and Peter's like,
how did you do that? I'm a very good lawyer.
I liked his character, because I've never seen the Daredevil series, but I enjoyed seeing him. He felt like a nice character.
Yeah.
And as we've seen in Hawkeye,
there's some connections if you've seen Hawkeye. If you haven't, then we're in heavy spoiler territory. It's Kingpin, y'all. Yeah.
I enjoyed the first bit. I was surprised. It was more enjoyable than expected.
It draws you in. Now, this is where I had that little interesting take on the opening. The opening sequence is handled beautifully because it picks up directly after he's like, Spider-Man's real identity is it's Peter Parker, and he's like, what the, and then horn honk because no F-bombs in the MCU.
And I was like, the first F-bomb in the MCU. Nope. Because every Spider-Man movie has ended with there being a what the.
I don't think this one did though.
No, this one was just sad and depressed.
But and then the sequence of him saving MJ it balances the drama of the situation with some comedy moments exceptionally well, and it feels great. I mean, this is where
it felt like 21st century when Peter Parker grabbed MJ and she swatted a woman away and she said, "Spider-Man hit me! Spider-Man hit me!"
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was, and it felt good. I really liked that sequence, and then Strange and Parker's relationship. I like. It's drawn out more in the actual film than the trailers, because of course it is. But when Parker calls him Steven, he gets this look. He's kind of like, yeah, it feels weird, but I'll allow it. And then
Oh,
want to talk about Wong as well.
yeah.
Wong is now the Sorcerer Supreme because Strange looked away for 5 years, so on a technicality, Wong got it, although Wong claims Strange would burn the place down, which was a hilarious exchange. And a big change from the trailer is Wong saying, do not cast the spell, and then leaving. In the actual film, it feels much more like Wong,
Yeah.
with Wong saying no, and then Strange like, hasn't the kid been through enough, and then Wong just leave me out of it. And that felt much more like Wong than just callously, no, goodbye.
I think it was also because in the trailers he says no and goodbye. That's why everyone was like, it's Mephisto, because why would Doctor Strange do it without permission?
True, yeah.
Because he did ask for permission, then he said, just don't get me involved, which
Yeah,
basically was like,
just leave
yes,
me
we'll
out
do
of
it!
Yeah, and it makes sense because like if he really wanted him not to do it, leaving him alone is a terrible idea. But if he's like, just leave me out of it, then leaving it, you'll do what you're gonna do, and that's totally different.
And then the movie occurs, and I wonder how Wong reacted.
Yeah.
Because this movie takes place in a day.
A little more than that.
But like
From start to finish, it's a couple months. You're thinking the majority of the action is in a day, but from the opening to going to December, because remember, Far From Home ends in September, and we're in December or November, December for the rest of the film. So there's a couple months at the beginning, and then like a day for the rest of the movie.
Oh, I don't think so, because if you pay attention to it, it's only till after the final part does it switch. If you watch it, it's all one day because he does the spell, he takes the box, he does the thing, blah 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 blah, and then
You're misunderstanding what I'm saying.
what do you mean?
From the spell on is one day, but from the start of the film to the spell is a couple months.
I don't think it is.
I just told you the literal timeline on it.
Was it actually confirmed?
You see school start, and then it jumps to snow after Halloween. Take down those Halloween decorations, the character you hate. Not important. Next chunk. Parker attempts to convince an MIT administrator to accept MJ and Ned's applications, but is suddenly attacked by Dr. Otto Octavius. Octavius rips Parker's nanotech from his Iron Spider suit, which bonds with his mechanical tentacles, which, because Parker can control said nanotech, allows him to disable Doc Ock's arms and capture him. Q1 scene that made me laugh pretty hard when he wraps him up in the tentacle and he like tries to swing at him and just can't hit him because he can't move. I love that. And then Norman Osborne as the Green Goblin arrives on his glider. That scene in the trailer where the bomb hits the bridge, you hear the classic and Strange captures Doc Ock, places him in a holding cell, and brings Parker back to the Sanctum, where it's revealed that Doctor Strange has already caught the Lizard, who is also held captured in a similar cell. Strange explains to Parker that the spell summoned people from other parts of the multiverse who know Spider-Man's identity, and orders Parker, MJ, and Ned to capture the remaining people, which is where the Scooby-Doo this crap came from with stronger language.
No.
That's chunk 2.
I enjoyed this part. And obviously I was very wrong with the timeline because now it makes sense. Because I was misunderstanding what you were saying.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think I
most of the movie is a day. But from the start of the film to when the spell is cast is a couple months or a month.
That's where I was confused because I thought it was like, oh, all the same day, you know?
Yeah, that wouldn't work because you see them coming back from the summer trip, the first day of school, but it's not important.
Anyway.
Chunk 2.
Chunk 2.
Doc Ock. That's amazing.
Yeah. I like how they play with Otto in this because when they introduce Green Goblin, he's like Norman.
Yeah, because he's aware.
And that's when things start setting in. Because
Mm-hmm.
he's like, that's a ghost, you know, but that's more part of the next chunk.
Yes.
But this whole part was very much like he messed with the spell. Strange is like, what the crap, Peter, get out. And they deal with it.
Yeah.
And then he goes and finds the lady. And it was funny how he did it because he just like hopping on cars and looking through it. People were like, why is
Mommy,
he
it's
here?
Spider-Man.
And then he's talking to her. And he's trying to be all professional as they're standing in a highway.
Yeah. And there's like, I think this is not quite. No, well, we'll talk about it now. One of those lines that I mentioned is iconic, or will go down as pretty iconic, is from Doc Ock when he's talking about Osborne in the cell, and he's like, "It's not Osborne. He died." And then either what we saw is not Norman Osborn, or you're swinging off into the night to fight a ghost. Like, that line was beautiful. Because that is essentially Spider-Man's legacy with all the villains who die fighting him throughout the movies. Like, that is oof.
Yeah.
And the framing of the scenes and Doc Ock, I could talk forever about him.
Yeah. I liked how they had more like objects tossed around, though it still felt
It felt like a
not
Raimi
like
fight instead of an MCU fight, using the
yes.
scenery. We mentioned that in, I think, Eternals or Shang-Chi, where they weren't using the scenery. Or maybe it was that we just mentioned Spider-Man 2 that they were. This one does it again, with Doc Ock throwing literally everything. I loved it. It was great action sequence. I also like the struggle between Otto's mind and the artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah.
Because like Otto is like trying to talk normally about Osborne, and then the kids are like, "Enough of your questions, boy!" And I really like the subtle struggle for control that happens throughout the film. So our next chunk, as Parker captures Max Dillon, Electro, and Flint Marko Sandman, which we mentioned, Sandman saves Parker from Electro's attack. Osborne, seemingly reclaiming control of himself by destroying his Green Goblin helmet, goes to a feast building where May works, where he is treated by May before Parker retrieves him. While discussing their battles with Spider-Man, the captured villains realize that some of them were pulled from the universes just before their death. That was a chilling scene, with each one's revelation that they died. It was just like, ooh.
Yeah.
And Strange prepares a spell contained within a box, because reasons, that will send. They never really explain why it's in a box this time. I guess so they could, stop it. I guess. Yeah, I guess it's so they could stop it, right? They could remove the box so he couldn't finish it instead of just doing what he was doing before. But contained in a box that will send the villains back to their respective universes to meet their fates. But Parker argues that they should first cure their powers of sanity, hoping that doing so would prevent their deaths upon their return. Parker steals said box and traps Strange in the mirror dimension and takes the villains to Hogan's apartment. So, what we were saying or at the beginning is, would he win against Strange? He beat Strange in the mirror dimension because it was all physics and geometry, and it didn't feel cheap either. Because Strange was pulling his punches.
That smart.
Yeah, and Strange was pulling his punches. He doesn't want to hurt the kid. And Parker's just like, well, you think this is magic. I see this as math. I'm good at math. And I beat you.
I also like the part when he first grabs it and Strange pushes him like out of his body.
He's like, that's so cool.
And then Strange starts trying to steal the box, and Peter's body is reacting. So I think it's the Spidey sense that took over.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, the Spidey sense.
And it's like, that's cool that because they really emphasize the like Spider-Man's, Spidey sense in this movie.
Yeah.
Because in the past two, it's not like there.
It really just came up in when the Vulture tried to attack him with the wing pack behind, with Mysterio on the bridge, and the arm hair standing up in Infinity War. That was about it.
Yeah.
But they really
this movie, they really tied it in.
Yeah. And there is an absolutely hysterical moment in this chunk that did make me and the entire theater laugh out loud, where when they beat Electro and he stops being a ball of energy and he's an actual man, and he's standing there in front of Sandman and Parker, and he's like, so, we just gonna stand around here and pretend that I'm not buck-ass nude? And then Flint Marko looking over his head, that's what I'm doing. I love it. It was so funny. We all laughed. out loud in the
Like,
theater.
the way it was presented, it felt like it was like the opening of a Terminator movie. How he's standing there with his
Yeah,
pole around him and he's
yeah.
just naked. I'm like, it's just like Terminator all of a sudden.
So now let's talk about the next little bit here. This is still part of the third chunk. They successfully cure Octavius, which has a nice, heartwarming little the voices I'd almost forgotten. And actually, just before they cure him, there's a hilarious joke from Aunt May. Dr. Octopus, she's like, you thirsty? And would you like some water? Like, yes. Fresh or salt?
Um,
Because you're an octopus. And just the look she gives him, fresh it is. I love that. um, but Osborne, as they go to cure the others, and almost succeed in curing Electro, Osborne's goblin persona takes control and convinces young cured villains to betray Parker. This is the start of one of my complaints. And then Dylan, Marco, and Connor's escape. Osborne, using his glider and a bomb, mortally wounds Aunt May, who has a very sad and touching goodbye with Parker. And he is holding her as she dies while Happy sadly watches from the car while being arrested by the police.
that this part hurt.
It is so raw. And also one of the most savage fights, actually second most savage fight of the whole film, Goblin versus Parker round 1. That was a brutal fight to watch. And then of course the climax is Aunt May's death, fully completing her Uncle Ben arc.
Yeah, I liked some of the things they did in this because they mentioned like Otto being like Norman, because
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't in that persona of he's horrible. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, you're here and we're all healing each other. But this is the part where I felt like Flint Marco was important because he talked to Electro about giving up his powers.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm just a normal person, so why should I give up my powers? And he's going through that dilemma, like Electro. And he's thinking, is this good? And it's almost done. But the whole time he can sense an arc reactor on
Mm-hmm.
the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
And that felt interesting because you feel this tension the whole time.
Yeah. And he keeps looking at the wall and yeah.
It's just this soft tension that's there. And as it gets closer and closer, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter until it snaps.
Yeah. And so if I may start my complaint, Flint Marco is not being sent back to his universe to die. He is being sent back to, and it's not just them changing it from the movie. They establish he is not going back to die. He's just going back to see his kid. Why wouldn't he help Parker as he did earlier? He has nothing to gain by helping Goblin and the other villains, and yet he does. This is my complaint. Marco's motivations make no sense at that point. I still like what they did with Marco, but it's like, why? That does not add up. It's not in his, unless they intended something that I can't see, but the way I see it, it doesn't benefit him at all. He's
They
of
were
no
trying
benefit.
to show like he's confused and he's scared and that he's afraid that Spider-Man's just gonna kill him with what they're doing because they never actually showed like him in a human form with his sand at all.
No, it's almost like he lost the ability to do that almost.
Yeah.
Which was
It wasn't. You only see him in human form at the very end.
Yeah, and more about that in a little bit.
But this fight was raw. It was like, oh my goodness. This is what I meant by he gave fear. This whole part just felt like he is here to kill you and he is not going to stop.
And the way that Willem Dafoe and Green Goblin command the room, even in the original, when he switches from Osborne to Goblin persona, his demeanor changes and your attention is just immediately on him. Like when he goes on his very increasingly volume print, it's so good.
And just that whole fight where they're throwing each other through walls, through the floor, just everywhere, and just beating the snot out of each other. It was like, this was a raw, fist to fist fight,
Yeah, absolutely.
You didn't know which side was gonna win.
Yeah. So, with Aunt May's death, Parker goes on the run in the rain because movie got a movie, and no one knows where he is. A distraught Ned and MJ attempt to find him, with Ned discovering that he can use Strange's sling ring, which Parker removed from him in the mirror dimension, to open portals. So he wishes to find Peter Parker and opens a portal, and out pops Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, because of course Peter Parker knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he tries it again, and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man comes through as well. And this scene culminates with Ned, MJ finding Holland's Parker and comforting him while the other Spider-Men share their own stories of losing loved ones and encourage him to fight on May's honor as they took comfort in Gwen. Well, not Gwen. It's a little deeper than that. But with both Uncle Ben's deaths, and then Garfield saying that he's in a dark place right now because he wasn't able to save Gwen. So this was the scene that everybody was wondering about. Yes, it's true. All three live-action Spider-Men on screen together. Yes, it was pretty great, and Tobey Maguire looks really old.
Yeah, after watching the Spider-Man 2,
Yeah.
and then you see this, is like...
It probably didn't bother other people as much, but we had just watched him from 16 or 18 years before, so it looked really different.
But this scene, everyone was like yelling and hyped.
Oh yeah, there was hollering in the theater.
But before we touch on it more, I want to point out when Tom goes out, like when Peter runs away after that, and it just shows him like straight at his face in the rain listening to the report.
What a shot.
That was like heart-wrenching because you know what happens, and Jameson is blaming Aunt May's death on Peter.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh!
Yeah. This movie is pretty well done if you haven't realized that by now.
Yeah. And back to the two guys. This was funny because when they both see each other and then they both like shoot webs at each other, go on the ceilings. And was it Ned's? Is it his grandma?
I think his grandma. Yeah.
And she's just like, oh my goodness, I'm done.
I love when they're trying to make Garfield prove that he's Peter Parker, that he's Spider-Man. So he goes up onto the ceiling to prove it. They're like, crawl across. And he's like, this is plenty of proof. And then the grandma, who's only speaking Spanish, like, says something. And Ned's like, oh, she wants to know if you can get the cobweb in the corner. And the look of, I am so done with this. He crawls across the ceiling. It was so good. And the scene where the Spider-Man and they talk to Holland and MJ and Ned.
It was impactful.
It's a beautiful scene.
It's a great showing the emotion. And again, Andrew Garfield, amazing acting.
The three Parkers developed cures for the remaining villains and lured Dylan, Marco, and Connors to the Statue of Liberty, where Maguire and Tom Holland, I'm going to call them by their actor's name because I don't know how else to really specify them. That's consistent. They cure Marco and Connors respectively. Octavius arrives as, this was one of my favorite scenes, Electro is zapping Garfield and Holland and holding them in place. And then Octavius comes up, arrives on the scene as like, they're mine. And grabs the two Parkers and then with his other hand grabs Electro and finishes the cure on him. As he is, of course, cured himself. I don't know how Electro forgot that fact, but he did.
Yeah.
And Ned would then proceed to free Strange from the mirror dimension, where we have an interesting note of Ned being able to open the portals. Like, Strange walks up to the, you open that portal? Yeah, and then, and walks away. I liked that very much. But Osborne arrives and destroys the box, rupturing the barrier separating the universes. While Strange tries to maintain the barrier, an enraged Parker attempts to kill Osborne in the most savage fight in the film. But Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man stops him, grabs the glider that... So Goblin tried to kill Parker the same way he tried to kill Maguire's back in the original, and Holland grabbed the glider and started beating him with it. And Parker grabs it before he can kill him. And then Goblin proceeds to stab Maguire in the back, and that just seemed poetic at that point.
Yeah.
Garfield and Holland then work together to inject Osborne with his cure, restoring his sanity. Maguire does not die, as a lot of people may have expected. So that deals with our villains, so let's stop and chat.
There was a lot of things to unpack with this whole thing, you know?
all the conversations between the Spider-Men
They
were
they
so
were
good.
great.
When they first try to fight the three villains and they're failing because they don't know how to work as a team, McGuire's like, I don't know how to work as a team. Garfield, I don't know why they're in the Holland. Don't worry, I do. I was with the Avengers. And McGuire's like, that's great. Is that a band? And then Garfield, you were in a band? It was so funny.
There, I want more, but I know they can't be more because of just the way it was done. There can't be. But their
Yeah.
interactions was just amazing.
I love you
And
guys. Thank you.
thanks.
Yeah.
I love it. But there was a lot of things that were done that just made everybody happy in this last part.
Very fan
No.
servicey.
Oh, definitely. If you haven't seen all the other ones, this movie would have been like, why is everyone so hyped over everyone? And it's just like, but there were so many good things. And we look at, when they're designing the cures and all that, and Ned's having the conversation with McGuire. He's like, so do you have any friends or guy in the chairs? She's like, I had one. He died in my arms. And it was just like, oh.
And
now I'm like really sad, and my theater erupts in laughter, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, we were talking about that. That's the wrong reaction to that scene. But I like is he's like, he died in my arms after he tried to kill me, and then that's the scene I mentioned about Ned being funny. Is he just blurts out a couple minutes later to Tom Holland, "I promise I won't betray you and try and kill you." Thanks, Ned. There's so much that can be said, but honestly, we wouldn't be able to do it justice. If you want to see them, see the movie. Our next little bit here. Peter realizes that the only way to protect the multiverse is to erase himself from everyone's memories and requests Strange to do so, while promising MJ and Ned that he will find them again. So this has a lot to unpack in a very brief scene. There's the very emotional goodbye between Parker, Ned, and MJ, specifically Parker and MJ. There's actually, honestly, I think I cried more at the Ned goodbye, but that's just because the bros.
Yeah. The bros before.
Saying goodbye to the Parkers was a really cool scene. It had the funny little, you're in a lot of pain, aren't you? Oh, yeah. They also made a my back joke with McGuire, referencing that famous meme.
Oh, yeah. That was hilarious. There was a lot of things, and Strange saying goodbye.
Yes, that's what I want to mention is when Strange is saying no, he won't do it, and Parker's like, what, it won't work? And he's like, yes, it will. But that means that everybody who loves you, we, and then catches himself that he said we, including himself and those who love him. And then he thinks about saying it just we won't know you exist. And it's like, oof, Strange, oof. Because you see it in his face that the we slipped out because he didn't want to say it, and then just while it's out there now, we. I loved it.
There was so many emotions. This movie,
it's
after Aunt May dies, you're just like,
oh. It's a ride.
You go from being the saddest person ever to being the most hyped to being so depressed yet again.
Yeah. The spell is cast, which returns everyone to their respective universes and wipes the memory of Peter Parker from everyone in his universe. Parker later visits MJ and Ned to reintroduce himself, but decides against it. And while mourning at May's grave, he has a conversation with an unaware Hogan, who doesn't remember him, and is inspired by Hogan to carry on without his identity, making a new suit and resuming his superheroics. And that rolls the credits, and we'll talk about the mid-credits in a minute. What an ending! I don't think anyone saw that coming. It is such a downer of an ending.
When he goes and tries to talk to MJ and Ned, it's just like... It's a lot of awkward, just him just staring at them. Because internally, he's like, if I tell them, there's so many problems that will arise.
Mm-hmm.
And it very much tackles like what Toby was dealing with, of him having two different lives and how he didn't want to be with MJ because of the dangers. And then she says screw, and then we watch Spider-Man 3 and she obviously
unscrews it.
Yeah. Anyways, but it shows that emotion again, and Tom shows it greatly, and it just you can see the pain in his face, knowing
Yeah.
that he can't do it.
Yeah.
He can't put
It's
them in the harm.
so to explain this movie in as graphic as possible. You're loving the new Spider-Man affair, seeing the old villains, and May dies, and your heart is ripped out. You pick it up off the floor, you're getting a little hyped, then you get the follow-up scene of the Maguires comforting the Spider-Man comforting each other, you kind of drop the heart again. Then you pick it up again, cool actions, you almost put it back in, then that ending happens. And then as you bend down to pick it up with that final thing, you step on it and you're just dead. It's
You're like, I
oh.
have no emotion.
You're
It just
crying the whole
hurt.
time. I didn't actually cry, although I did
No.
tear up at the goodbye scene
Yeah.
between the
I teared up at Aunt May.
I
That
teared
was
up
hard.
then too, but I think the goodbye hurt me more.
Yeah.
Because personal
It just
reasons, I guess.
yeah. There's just a lot of things that just this felt like the perfect Spider-Man movie that everyone needed. That
So
if you had done all the Spider-Man and all that, this felt like the
yeah. So let's talk about the mid credits and post credits scene. I'm gonna trash the mid credits scene a bit. It is a lazy cop out of a scene. Spoilers for Let There Be Carnage. At the very end of that film, there's a post credits scene of Venom and Brock being universe displaced in the MCU along with the other villains. And in the mid credits scenes, that universe displaced Eddie Brock and his symbiote Venom, Tom Hardy, of course, again, decide to go find Tom Holland's Spider Man, but are suddenly returned to their universe by Strange's spell, unknowingly leaving part of the symbiote behind. So I know that that's the setup, that there's now a symbiote in the MCU, but what a cop out. Just do the Sinister
yeah.
Six. He was your sixth guy. Just come on.
Yeah.
It was a cop
I
out.
think it's because this Venom had very much been like an anti-hero and he's
True.
been trying to help people that I don't think it worked too well.
True. And then the post-credit scene, which we're not really going to talk about, is it's just the trailer for Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness and has been
And they
fully
just
released.
released it.
So
Yeah.
just go watch the trailer and you've seen the post-credit scene.
I kind of disappointed that that's what they did for the end
Yeah,
credits.
I would have wanted something different.
They could have just been like, and that like could have done something with either confirming another movie or just
Yeah,
that's it
all
for
we get is
Spider-Man.
Doctor Strange will return. I mean, like, we just saw this trailer, so that's not a surprise.
Yeah.
Um, so
But yeah, there were moments in that movie that just whew, a lot of things.
so as we have to remove the time where we weren't actually recording at various moments throughout this session, but let's transition to our final little block here, our favorite and least favorite scene. I'll go first for favorite, and you'll go first for least favorite. So my favorite scene is the ending when Otto arrives and defeats Electro, but more specifically when he reunites with Maguire. Because he pulls the arc reactor off Electro's chest, and he's holding it in his tentacle, and he quotes his line from that he said multiple times in Spider-Man 2, "The power of the sun." And then Maguire's voice for off camera, "In the palm of your hand," and he looks and sees him, and his reaction is so pure. "Peter, my boy, my dear boy, it's so good to see you. It's good to see you too, Doctor." And they have this beautiful reunion that I love so much. It is my favorite scene.
As we talked about when we talked about Spider-Man 2, how they had this almost father-son relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it just this reuniting of father and son that Peter needed, and it felt good. It felt
Yeah,
happy. You
I
feel good emotions.
I hope that the change they made to Doc Ock helps him survive back in the other years, but we'll probably never find out. But I hope. I hope.
Yeah.
What was your favorite scene?
There
There's a lot.
are a
Let me
few.
establish that. There's a lot.
There's like three scenes I'm thinking of when Andrew has his redemption of when he
Yes.
lost Gwen and saving MJ, and
Yeah.
you're just like,
Explain that a bit
yes.
more for the listener.
So MJ falls off. Why did she fall off again? Was it because of the explosion?
Explosion.
Or
Yeah.
Yeah, the explosion that blew up the box of Doctor Strange's thing, and she falls off, and Tom goes to go get it. Green Goblin's glider gets him, and then Andrew grabs her and saves her.
Yeah, it's like
And
the
it
same
was
framing
just
as the
like this.
Gwen Stacy scene.
You feel so proud
Yeah,
that he got it. You
and
feel happy.
and he bursts into tears, which was the perfect reaction. And people in
Yeah.
my theater laughed, and I was like, "This is not funny. This is
No.
very poignant and important. This isn't a laughing
Yeah.
matter." Um, what's another one from you? You got through. Might as well
I
mention them.
So there was that one when when all the Spider-Mans kind of like get introduced and they come through the portals and all that, and then when they're swinging around, once they figure out how to coordinate things, and like they will web each other and like toss each other
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. It was like, oh, and then just that whole apartment sequence when Green Goblin fights Parker and then Aunt May. That sold the movie to me.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't include the rest of the Parkers, I would have been disappointed, but I would have been satisfied just because of that.
Mm-hmm. You may go first for your least favorite scene.
That's hard. I
Yeah,
think
there's not a ton of there's no bad scenes in this film. Like even
no,
my least favorite scene is just my least favorite of the bunch,
yeah,
and it's not a bad scene, but
no.
just setting that precedent.
I like I yeah. It's hard to think of one because there's a lot of good things. It'd probably just be like when they're interviewing Flash Thompson on his new book and all that, and you're just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a book.
I've already commented on mine, but I'm just going to hammer it home again. It's that Sandman turns on Parker and helps the other villains at the ending. It is not in his best interest.
No.
Mind you, the scene it occurs in, phenomenal. It's that fight scene with all the Parkers.
Yeah.
But it just is not in his best interest. And it's hard to pick a least favorite when there's no bad scenes, but for me, that's just my least favorite of the bunch. And I still like the scene. It's just his motivations are screwy.
The scene that I wanted to mention about the bad CGI
Yeah,
is
you never.
if when they're actually going to save MJ. If you watch Tom jump, it literally looks like they tried to use slow motion. There was no slow motion, and they just slowly glided Tom down, and then he gets hit. And then when Andrew grabs MJ and then lands, he bounces like a trampoline with his knees.
Oh, no, I didn't notice that.
It's because I've seen the scene on Instagram a few times now, and I notice it every time. I'm like,
Yeah,
those
I have
knees.
not. So our final bit, our overall rating. Why don't you go first on this one?
it's it's pretty high. I'm gonna give it like a 95. This movie sat well. I could probably give it more, but I'm not that nice. I maybe even a 97 though.
I as everyone who tuned in last week, be sure to check out the Spider-Man 2 podcast. I absolutely love Spider-Man 2. It's my favorite Spider-Man movie, and I'm like, there's no way that anything could beat it. And I said it for years that nothing could beat it unless they did a better movie with Doc Ock and Alfred Molina. And you take Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, the best Spider-Man, the other Spider-Man, the humor of the MCU. This is the new best Spider-Man movie. And I promise you, we did not coordinate this 97%. Best movie we reviewed so far. And the best movie of 2021. And there's been some good contenders for 2021's best film.
There's been some good ones.
Yeah. Speaking of, we'll talk about one of them next time, where we do Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
That movie.
It's a good movie too, folks. You're gonna make sure you want to tune into that with potential guest stars, but none of them have gotten back to me yet, so who knows? Maybe, or maybe just the two of us horribly butchering names. So tune in next time for our review of 2021's Dune, where if we do have said guest stars, there will be a little tension at the start, as they'll very much disagree with what I have to say in my opening comments. So yeah, we'll see about that. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this deep look into Spider-Man No Way Home. The consensus is clear. See this movie. Sure, there are some plot holes, but the spectacle is so good that it sweeps you into it, and you can forgive it unless you are overly harsh.
Yeah.
It
Do you
tells a good
actually see
story.
the new audience score for Rotten Tomatoes is 99?
Yeah, and it's
It's
it's good.
it deserves it.
Yeah, and it's just whenever anything tries to do multiverse or time travel, there's gonna be plot holes every time.
Oh,
But this one is more than forgivable. So from the Great Movie Ride, I've been Gaston,
I've been Jerryofdom / Nick.
and we'll see you in the movies. Until next time, everybody.
Next time.